Okay, so in keeping with the theme of child-adolescent psychiatry, it would not be appropriate to leave out the specific learning disorders. But this is really just going to be a quick one-slide tidbit on learning disorders. It's usually not something that psychiatrists, per se, are working with, so you need to know a little bit about it, and I think you need to know when to refer a particular patient to the right group of people to help them with this specific learning disorders, but let's just go over a little bit about it just so you're aware. So learning disorders, they're associated with below expected abilities in academic achievement and usually defined as certain areas of academics. Particularly, you'll hear about mathematics, you'll hear about reading, and you'll hear about writing and things like that. And of course, it won't be appropriate for the child's chronological age, measured level of intelligence, and the age-appropriate education. So these children will have deficits in reading, mathematics, and writing, specifically that are lower than their level of intelligence based on things like IQ tests, the age-appropriate level of education, so what grade they're in, and their chronological age. The symptoms have to be present for at least 6 months. So like many things in psychiatry, a good guess if you're not sure would be that the disorder has to be present for at least 6 months, because that's true for a lot of the cases. So in the case of specific learning disorders, it is no different. It's 6 months. And that would be despite other provisions or interventions that target those difficulties. So that would be despite, say, hiring a tutor, getting extra help after class, doing a reading course, doing a writing course, whatever, getting some kind of assistance with these disorders. It's still persistent. So the difficulties include things like inaccurate, slow reading, difficulty with reading comprehension, difficulties with spelling, difficulties with written expression, difficulties with mastering number sense and calculations, and difficulties with mathematical reasoning. So most of the beginning ones are reading related. You're either reading inaccurately, you're reading slowly, you have just difficulty reading, comprehending the things that you are reading, or you have some of the writing difficulties, which might be difficulty spelling, difficulties with written expression, and of course the mathematical problems that people have is usually they don't have a sense of number calculations or difficulties going through things like mathematical reasoning. The differences between achievement and IQ must be 1.5 standard deviations below the mean. So that's kind of important. It's a calculation that you would make. Remember, IQ, the mean is usually 100, and there's plus or minus 15, I believe, each standard deviation. So it's 100 plus or minus 15. And so the IQ, knowing the IQ test, and this would be part of any assessment. So if you've ever heard of like the child study team at the schools, they would go through all of this kind of psychological testing. They would also do, and obviously an IQ test is included in there, and many, many other assessments to kind of determine that, this child is meeting the proper criteria. But that's one of the important things that might be testable. IQ must be 1.5 standard deviations below the mean, based on the level of achievement that the child is having. The disorder is usually diagnosed during the first grade, when reading, writing, and mathematics is taught. So again, that's kind of like, if you're smart and you're thinking about this, you're like, when do kids normally start to learn things or get introduced to, reading, writing, mathematics? And again, first grade is the time when a lot of that is happening. So kind of remember first grade as the time frame when we start to see these deficits. Children with learning disabilities, what's the problem with these kids really overall is that they will learn with the proper help in most cases. However, what happens to a lot of these kids is they wind up dropping out. So the dropout rate's really, really high. It's as high as 40%. So the kids get frustrated. And this is also true if you've ever read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers book. He talks about how like being in the right place at the right time and starting things early really, really helps in terms of getting that 10,000 hours of focused or deliberate practice and making you sort of a master at whatever it is you're trying to achieve. But what happens with kids is that early on, those who are supposedly have some special talent in mathematics or reading or writing, well, they start to get identified at that same time too. They get identified, say, at the age of like 5, or not the age of 5, I'm sorry, the first grade. They get identified in first grade. They're like, oh, these kids have sort of like a natural talent for reading, writing, mathematics, and then of course they get extra help, they get more focus from the teachers, and that helps them. But the exact opposite is true for the kids who are suffering with learning disabilities, because what happens for those kids is that they end up getting no attention. They end up looking silly in the classroom, and the teacher's like, well, I'm not going to waste my time with this person because obviously they're just not getting it, even though they are suffering with some kind of disability. So high dropout rate, and the prevalence is actually pretty high. So the prevalence of learning disorders anywhere from 5 to 15% among school-aged children. So quite a few school-aged children have learning disorders. Treatment is obviously tutoring and appropriate accommodations for testing. So what happens with a lot of these kids is if they go through the child study team and they're deemed to have a learning disorder, first of all, you want to define what that specific learning disorder is. Is it, mathematics? Is it problems with calculations? Is it reading, or is it writing? Then what they're going to do is they're going to make accommodations, like unlimited time for tests, let's say, because they realize that, it takes the kid a longer period of time to, say, read the test questions in order to comprehend them properly. So that's how we basically treat it. We provide extra assistance. We might provide smaller classrooms with, teachers who are more geared towards educating children with learning disorders. But for the most part, it's accommodations and tutoring that really help these people. And again, they can go on to live really great lives. They can even go to medical school. So I will leave it there, and in the next video I'll pick up some more about childhood disorders, going more into the other disorders like depression, bipolar, etc. And we'll talk about that.